David Stearns, president of baseball ops for the Mets, joining us right now. David, great to have you on here for the first time. Congrats on the gig, and we'll get into all that. Just curious, is there anyone that you grew up with that's either playing or working in the game that you have like a really long history of friendship with?
It's interesting. My college roommate worked in baseball for a long time. He then got out of baseball, went back to law school. From like my childhood, probably not. But I think you kind of grow up in the game, and so I think all of a sudden some of my best friends are those that I've met along the lines and are still around in the game.
Yeah, I don't think Harvard wasn't producing too many players during the time that you were there.
Hey, we got Sudi B. We got Brent Suter. That counts.
Not while you were there.
No, he's a little younger than I am. He's a little younger than I am, but we still claim him.
All the SMAT kids up there.
We still claim him. This is a tough act following Q Berry.
I was going to ask him a question. I was going to ask him, like, what should we ask Stearnsy? So I'm pretty sure he texted me, but let me read this. Why did you trade Hader? Wow, right off the bat. Unbelievable.
Yeah, well, that probably wouldn't be the first time that coaching staff asked me that question. So I've gotten that one before.
No, seriously, though, like, in that situation, now you're in a new role.
Yeah.
One, what did you learn? One, how will you do it differently? And another part of it is, how did that all come to fruition?
Yeah, I've, as it probably wouldn't surprise you, I've thought about that transaction a lot. I've thought about that decision a lot. And look, what we were trying to do there, I think, was thread a needle, right? We were in a spot where we felt like we had a playoff caliber team. We were also trying to set ourselves up going forward, and we understood we were probably at the optimal time to get future value back for Josh. We thought we were going to be able to do an adequate job of backfilling after we traded Josh, and clearly we didn't. We made that trade. We were in playoff position, and we ended the year out of playoff position. That when you do something like that, it's going to hurt, and it stings, and frankly, it should sting. So, I think the intentions there were admirable. It was about extending a window as long as you possibly could, but we didn't execute it well enough. I didn't execute it well enough, and we missed the playoffs, and certainly that stung.
All right. Well, I had to ask the hard-hitting question because I really don't care what happened with Hader. Why the heck did you sign Yasmani Grandal and then you fired me? That's the real question I wanted to know. I wanted to come back.
Yeah. For a long time, we thought you were going to come back too, and then Yaz kind of fell through the cracks that offseason. We had a chance to bring him in. But one question I had for you, Kratzy, if we can change the roles here a little bit, is on the website here, you're not in a Brewers uniform, and I'm curious about that. Like, that had to have been among the most memorable stretches in your career, right? So can we get you in a Brewers uniform on the website?
It was until January 18th when you signed Yasmani Grandal, and then it became just another season. No, I don't. You have to talk to Claudia. She runs
the show. Okay.
Choice, but that all culminates into my next question. Right now, in this time of the season, yes, Yasmani Grandal fell through the cracks. He needed a 1-year deal, was looking to get, a paid deal of $60 million, and he didn't get it. Now this is where we're at in spring training. I mean, spring training's coming. This is where we're at in the offseason. Yeah. How do these deals come to fruition in the sense of there's still guys out there that have 1-year deals that might be happening, or they want $300 million, and you're in the market, now where you guys have a little more cash.
Yeah, so somewhere in the middle between a 1-year deal and $300 million. I feel like that's the bid ask on a lot of players when you get to this point in the offseason. Look, every offseason runs at a different pace, and they move differently, and it can be tough to predict. And you never really know when someone who frankly probably deserves a significantly bigger contract is going to get a 1 year deal as spring training approaches. And so you kind of just got to keep in touch with everyone and see what falls through. And you're right, I'm fortunate to be in a market right now where we can take shots at certain times. And certainly Steve, as an owner, has done that before. We're certainly going to do it again when the opportunities arise, when the time is right. And so that's an exciting place to be.
David, what was it like for you last year? I mean, you were officially a Brewers employee, but you really couldn't do anything. So what did you do? What did you do? And then how long, and honestly, how long did you know you were going to be a Met? Because it was already out there. Like, hey, David Stearns, he's the next president of baseball operations for the Mets. So were you like, was there a little bit of like, hey, the Brewers are doing this, and you're calling Cohen and you're like, hey, watch out, the Brewers are thinking about doing this?
Yeah, I could assure you that was not going on. So I had this like unique, almost like a professional gap year where I was doing some advising for the Brewers, and then towards the back half of the year, that kind of faded away. I did a little bit of advising in some other sports, which was really interesting to me. I spent a lot of time with my family, which was wonderful. And got to travel a little bit at times a year that I normally don't get to travel. And I didn't really know what was going to happen and where this was going to end up. I didn't know whether the right situation was going to pop up for me and my family to jump back into this. But as we got into August and I was allowed to talk to other teams, the Mets reached out. We had some really good conversations. And then by, I guess, mid-September or so, we were able to agree on something. And I'm very fortunate and grateful that it happened.
Didn't you grow up a Mets fan? Did you grow up a Mets fan?
I did.
So is there more pressure on you now? Because now you're the head. Listen, so now your family will call you. Forget your own pressure. Now your mom and dad are going to be like, hey, David, that was an awful signing. Yeah, sorry. Thanks. Love you. Bye.
Yeah, I mean, people warn me about the talk radio in New York. My like Thanksgiving dinner table is going to be rougher than any talk radio that you can find here. So sure, but that's the fun of this for me, right? Is that this is because I grew up here, because I grew up a Mets fan. There's a little bit more meaning to it, and my family cares about it more, and my friends care about it more, and you want to succeed even more because of that, because all the people that this would mean so much to if we get this right, and if we're able to develop the type of organization that I really believe we can.
Can you take us through a little bit of the Yamamoto pursuit and the fact that did you feel like you were behind the eight ball because some teams are talking about how they scouted him for the last 2 or 3 years and you're just now coming to the Mets organization, which, by the way, feels like you've been the Mets GM for like 3 years now, but I know it's just back in October, but that's how it feels for me. I don't know how it feels for you, but take us through a little bit of how the Mets pursued him?
Yeah, so I was fortunate that the Mets have done a great job of scouting Japan and the Pacific market in general. I felt very well informed of the type of player he was when I showed up. I felt very well informed of the type of person. And it's not like this was a player that just sort of jumped on the baseball scene over the last couple of months. This was clearly a very well-known player over the last couple of years. And so while I wasn't with a team previously that was likely to be shopping in this aisle of the grocery store, I was very aware of who this player was and was tangentially watching him. And then when I got here, dug in as deep as I possibly could. And look, we gave it our best shot. And I think as an organization, we did pretty much everything we could. I thought it was a good process, fair process. And ultimately, the player chose to go to LA, which we respect. But we're going to go through these types of pursuits in the future. And there are going to be times where we land the player. And that'll certainly be exciting for us.
What about Alonso? When are we going to have the presser? David Stearns, you're up there and you got a nice new number 20 jersey in orange and blue. Pete, congratulations. You're a Met for life.
Let's set it up for tomorrow. Can we do it tomorrow? Can you broker the deal?
Sure, I can be in Port St. Lucie in about an hour and 45 minutes.
You guys can broker the deal, and we'll set it up for tomorrow, and we'll be done with it.
Do I get a cut if I broker it? What's my cut?
Ask Boris.
That's Pete's decision. That's Pete's decision. Look, Pete's a really good player. He's performed on a big stage here for a long time. I know that. We all know that. I know how important he is to our fan base. I think where we are right now, where Pete is we're gonna everyone's gonna focus on this year. The best thing for us is for Pete to have a great year. The best thing for Pete is for Pete to have a great year. And then we'll go forward from there. But we're certainly, we're certainly invested in trying to keep Pete a Met. And I'm hopeful that over time we'll be able to work that out.
Now, you weren't with the Mets last year when they were getting rid of Scherzer and Verlander. How do you go into spring training with this squad as a new GM and convince big league baseball players, hey, we still can compete. We can still win this thing. What is your speech going to sound like when you give it to them or when you introduce Mendy?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. I don't think they need to be convinced. One of the really fascinating parts of my first couple of weeks on the job was talking to a bunch of our players, and they were trying to convince me how good they are. And I was like, no, guys, like, I get it. Like, this is a talented group we have here, and we're going to add to it, and we're going to be a good team next year. But I think the guys who were on the team last year believe that the group that was here last year and the group we have going forward is significantly better than what the win total from 2023 would demonstrate. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think a lot of people in baseball would believe that as well. So I really don't think I have to convince anyone. I think what I have to do and what we as an organization have to do and what Mendy and our coaching staff has to do is provide the environment that allows all of these guys to be who they are and be as successful as they possibly can be. If we put all of our players in the best position to succeed, I think we're going to have a really good year.
David, I want to go back to Pete for a sec. I grew up in the area. We've seen over the long course of the Mets that some players go there and it just doesn't work in New York. Pete obviously is thriving in New York and it takes something special. So my question is, when you enter the org officially, did you do the homework to be like, hey guys, why didn't we offer him an extension years back? Because Corbin Burns just got traded from the Brewers. If they had offered him something in 2018 or 19 when you were there, I'm sure
if he would have offered him?
That's what I'm saying. that kind of stuff happens. You did it with Freddie P. And look at him. He's thriving. He's a 1. So at least for the homework purposes, did you guys look into it and say, hey, why didn't we have conversations like this back in the day when obviously the player is going to cost less?
Yeah, so I think those are fair questions, and I think I'm certainly not going to disclose past organizational negotiating history, but I think over the course of any player's career, particularly a player who's had this much success, really from the moment he started his major league career, there are going to be conversations, and sometimes they get deep, and sometimes they don't get deep, but there are going to be conversations, and sometimes they line up, and sometimes they don't.
Hey, you can go ahead and throw the Brewers under the bus. You don't work for them anymore. Listen,
they almost traded for him.
Yeah, they almost traded you away.
No, they almost traded for Pete.
Oh, that's also true.
Remember?
Yeah, we thought Pete was going to the Brewers.
There's a lot
you guys, you ought to have been traded for each other. Stearns for Alonso, straight up, in a bag of balls, going to the Brewers. I mean, I always wondered that, like, you've been obviously doing this job for a long time now. I mean, you're like 25 years old. I get it.
Stop.
But how do organizations determine the guy? Is it just based on the amount of thought that they're actually going to accept in a contract extension, or is there a formula each organization has? I mean, because it seems kind of arbitrary to me at times. Like, why is this guy getting that, and there's another player that's equally as good or maybe more valuable, but they don't get anything?
Yeah, so I think there are different organizational philosophies on this topic, and there are different player philosophies. So I've known players who, as soon as they establish themselves in the big leagues, made it known that they wanted some security. They were going to value security, and they liked the organization. They wanted to be there for a long time. And sometimes that can spark a really productive dialogue and a back and forth. And then I've certainly encountered players who feel the opposite, who establish themselves in the big leagues and really want to bet on themselves through the arbitration process and into free agency. And so I think guys are motivated by a little bit different things. Guys are comfortable with different things. There are some organizations that are willing to take a little bit more risk earlier in a player's career, and some organizations that prefer to take a wait and see approach a little bit more to see what players become during their arbitration year. So I don't think there's a magic formula to it. I don't think there's certainly not a rule that's set in stone. I do think there's a lot of subjectivity to this. And ultimately there are different player preferences, and you guys can speak to that better than I can, about sort of just different wants and what is going to make a player and his family comfortable, versus the chase of going through the arbitration system and ultimately making it to free agency at the earliest possible point in your career.
David, I have a question about balancing this year versus the future, which I know is a hot topic. So I'll focus on one position, for example, DH. There's really good DHs available. Maybe they fit the right price structure for the Mets this offseason versus some of the young guys like a Vientos, who's going to look for more playing time this year, and looking back at, some of the young Mets players that got PT last year, but that you want to see further develop. How do you balance that when you're deciding on a move still with a couple weeks to go until, really everyone's getting ready for spring training, and there's a lot of free agents left?
There are. And look, these are conversations that we're constantly having internally, trying to figure out exactly what the right balance there is. I am a firm believer philosophically that we have to let young players play, that we have to allow young players to experience success and setback at the major league level, that's how we learn, that's how we get better. And so we have to provide room on our roster for that to happen. And that's not only this year, that's going to be going forward as well. We're going to want to have our young players who have performed well in AAA to have the opportunity to perform in the big leagues and get meaningful playing time. But you do have to balance that with maybe a little bit more certainty on your roster, with maybe a little bit higher degree of reliability in terms of what the production is going to be. And we've tried to do that this offseason. I think in certain areas of our roster, in the outfield a little bit, on the pitching staff, we've opted for a little bit more certainty. We've brought in some more veteran players with track records, guys who have had success in the big leagues in the past. And then in areas on the position player side, we've opted for providing a little bit more room for our younger players to play. And so that's the approach we're taking right now. I'm like every GM or president, like you're never going to say never, and you're always going to keep your options open. But I do think the right approach is to ensure we have sufficient opportunity and playing time for young players broadly as they reach the major league level.
Okay, so you like the young players. When was the last time you texted or emailed or called Scott Boras? Because he's got some good players. You don't have to say what you discussed. Just how recently was it?
I think Scott is very good at keeping in touch with all teams throughout the offseason. So certainly there's been plenty of touch points throughout the offseason.
Okay. All right. Speaking of another, I don't know if we're allowed to discuss this, but we had a manager on yesterday. Well, he's a former manager, and he used to manage the Mets. And so can you, since you won't talk about former teams' discussions, can you tell us why you got rid of Buck Showalter?
He's like, I hate you, Kratz, for inviting me on
Hey,
here.
it's easier from us. You're going to get it in spring training.
So a couple of thoughts there. Buck did a tremendous job with the Mets, and I think that's important to know. And I think we've noted that as an organization. Certainly, I have throughout my time here. The organization's better off for his time here, and he managed one of the best teams in Mets history, and we're not going to forget that. I'm also really excited to have Carlos Mendoza as a partner going forward here. And I think Mendy is a really, really talented manager. I think he's a really, really gifted baseball mind who has touched pretty much every area of baseball development and done so many jobs in the game. So, Buck was a very successful manager for a long time, including his tenure here with the Mets. And I'm thrilled that I get to partner now with Mendy going forward.
Okay, so listen. You can tune in on YouTube 1 to 3 Eastern every day. You'll get all the insight on baseball. So you can subscribe. It's free. It doesn't even cost you any of that big money you're making. Okay, but Buck actually was he was flowing praise on the Mets organization for the way it was handled, and also on Carlos Mendoza. Let's not. He could not have been happier for Carlos and what's happened and the way it was handled. So. I just wanted to see your answer because, one day when Kratz is a manager, I want to know what that conversation's like when Kratz gets fired from the GM.
Well, then Kratz can come on the show and talk about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I want to hear from a GM side. We got Buck side yesterday, so I want to hear from a GM side. Or, sorry, what is it?
Pobo.
Pete Pobo. Director.
Are people saying that, by the way? I mean, it's like become a thing this offseason. Let's finish with that. Does anyone come up to you and go like, "Oh, are you the Pobo of the Mets?" Like people are using that acronym a lot now.
No, this would be a first. I have not gotten that. I have not gotten that to this point. So maybe you guys can start a trend.
No, it's been a trend this offseason. I'm starting to see it everywhere. The POBO, like that. People know what that means. So I'm telling you, you're going to see it now.
All right,
David, we appreciate the time, dude. Awesome having you on. We'll see you in spring training. Actually, AJ and me are just a hop skip away. So
he's never been to Port St. Lucie. He doesn't know what he's in for.
I'm sure he has. You grew up in Mets fan.
I've been there, and yes, I know what I'm in for. I can't wait. It'll be an exciting 7 weeks.
We'll be there. We'll be there in a few weeks for a stop by. We'll come say hello. So,
sounds good, guys.
Good luck, man. We'll see you then.
Take care.
Thank you, David Stearns, President of Baseball Ops for the New York Mets.